The corridors of Caliph Station never slept, and neither did the whispers that followed Lyra Vance wherever she walked. She moved through the lower maintenance tunnels with her head down and her scarred hands hidden inside the pockets of her gray work uniform. But hiding made no difference, because everyone already knew about the burned woman who cleaned the air filters and fixed the broken pipes. 3 years ago she had been someone important, a xenobiologist with 2 degrees and a position aboard the research vessel Icarus, a scientist who had published papers and given lectures and dreamed of first contact with new species. Now she pushed a cleaning cart through hallways where aliens of a dozen different species looked at her with disgust or pity or both. The burns covered her hands from fingertip to wrist, a landscape of twisted scar tissue where the skin had melted and reformed into something that barely looked human anymore. Worked well enough to feel every flash of pain when she gripped her tools too tightly. She remembered the fire every single day. The Icarus had been 3 weeks from the nearest station when the engine core cracked, and flames swept through the crew quarters like a living beast hungry for oxygen and flesh. And Lyra had been in the cargo bay when the alarm started screaming, close to the emergency shuttle, but far from her crewmates, who were trapped behind a wall of fire in the sleeping quarters. She could have run to the shuttle and saved herself, because the pack was clear, and the flames had not yet reached that section. Instead, she ran toward the screaming. 19 trips through smoke and fire. 19 times she grabbed someone and dragged them to safety, while her hands blistered and blackened against the superheated metal of the doorframes. 19 people who lived because she refused to stop, even when her own flesh was cooking. Killed the Icarus when the hull finally collapsed, and Lyra barely made it to the shuttle, with 3rd-degree burns, turning her hands into ruined claws. The medical team saved her life, but could not save her career, because a xenobiologist needed steady hands for delicate work, and her hands would never be steady again. So now she cleaned filters on a space station, where nobody knew her name, and everybody knew her scars. The worst part was not the pain, or the lost career, or even the loneliness that wrapped around her like a second skin. The worst part was the Jacari. They called themselves the Apex, and the galaxy agreed, because no species had ever matched their combination of size and speed and killing instinct. 9 feet tall, with bodies built like wolves that had learned to walk upright, covered in fur as black as empty space, with eyes that glowed like molten gold. The Jacari had conquered 6 star systems before the Galactic Council convinced them. Trade was more profitable than war, but they never lost their belief that strength was the only thing that mattered, and weakness was a disease to be cut away. They came to Caliph Station often for trade negotiations and political meetings, and every time they passed Lyra in the corridors, their reaction was the same: laughter. Deep, rumbling laughter that vibrated through her chest and made her feel small and broken and worthless. Broken Claw, they called her in their language, a term she had learned to recognize even though she did not speak Zakari, the maimed one who could not even flee a fire properly. They thought her scars meant she was slow and stupid, too weak to escape danger, a failure of evolution that should have been left to die. Lyra never corrected them, because what would be the point when they would never believe that a human had chosen to burn rather than abandon her pack? Today was worse than usual, because of a Zakari delegation. Had arrived for emergency talks, and the station was crawling with apex warriors who seemed to fill every corridor with their massive bodies and their golden stares. Lyra pressed herself against the wall as a group of 4 Jacari strode past, their claws clicking against the metal floor in a rhythm that sounded like drums announcing a war. One of them noticed her and stopped. He was enormous, even by Jacari standards, with a scar running across his muzzle that spoke of battles survived and enemies defeated. And when he looked at Lyra, his lip curled back to reveal fangs longer than her fingers. This one again, he growled to his companions in heavily accented common, the trade language that all species use on the station. A fire-touched human who haunts these tunnels like a ghost. She should not be allowed among civilized beings, another Jacari said with a snort of contempt. Her weakness might be contagious. Lyra kept her eyes on the floor and said nothing. "Look at me, Broken Claw," the scarred one commanded. She raised her head slowly and met his golden gaze without expression, because she had learned that showing fear only made them crueler, and showing anger only made them laugh harder. "Show me your hands." For a moment she considered refusing, but refusing a Jacari was like refusing a hurricane, and so she pulled her hands from her pockets and held them up with the palms facing outward. The scarred tissue caught the light, and she watched disgust ripple across the faces of all four warriors, like waves spreading across water. "Pathetic," the leader declared. "Among my people you would have been left for the scavengers, your weakness pruned from the bloodline before it could spread." "I understand," Lyra said quietly, because those were the only words that would make them leave faster. The Jacari laughed again and continued on their way, their amusement echoing off the walls long after they had disappeared around the corner. Lyra stood alone in the empty corridor and looked down at her hands, at the twisted landscape of scar tissue that marked her as broken in the eyes of every species on this station. She flexed her fingers slowly and felt the familiar pull of tight skin over damaged nerves. These hands had carried 19 people through fire. These hands had gripped doorframes hot enough to melt flesh, because letting go meant letting someone die. These hands were not broken. They were proof that she had done something that none of those laughing warriors would ever understand. But she told herself this every day, and every day it got a little harder to believe. She picked up her cleaning cart and continued down the corridor toward the next air filter that needed changing. Just another invisible worker in a station full of important people doing important things. She did not know that her life was about to. She did not know that somewhere in the station a small Jacari pup was running for his life, abandoned by his own family, because he had been born with a twisted leg that made him limp. She did not know that in 3 days she would meet him in a maintenance crawl space, and everything she believed about strength and weakness would be tested in ways she could never imagine. All she knew was that her hands hurt and her heart was tired, and tomorrow would be another day of whispers and laughter and pretending that she did not care. Lyra Vance kept walking. The station kept spinning. And somewhere in the universe, fate was already weaving threads that would bring a burned human and a broken pup together in a story that would change the way an empire thought about strength. The news spread through Kalit Station like fire through dry wood, and within hours, everyone knew that someone had tried to kill the packfather of the Jacari High Pack. Lyra heard the whispers in the maintenance corridors where she worked. Fragments of conversation that painted a picture of chaos and violence and political upheaval that could shake the entire galaxy. The Packfather was named Vorteth, and he ruled the Jacari Empire with iron claws and absolute authority. A warlord who had killed his way to the top of the most dangerous species in known space. And now, someone had planted a bomb in his shuttle and nearly ended his reign. He survived because Jacari were hard to kill, but several of his guards had died, and the explosion had damaged his ship so badly that the entire delegation was now trapped on Kalith Station until repairs could be completed. Security tripled overnight. Armed patrols walked every corridor, and checkpoints appeared at every entry point. Every junction, and the station that had always felt crowded now felt like a cage, where everyone was being watched and everyone was afraid. Lyra tried to stay invisible, because invisibility had kept her safe for 3 years, and she had no desire to attract the attention of nervous soldiers or paranoid Zachary warriors looking for threats in every shadow. She kept to the maintenance tunnels where few others ventured, the narrow passages behind the walls where pipes carried water and cables carried power, and the air smelled of metal and recycled oxygen. 3 days after the assassination attempt, she was checking a junction box in a crawlspace deep beneath the residential section when she heard a sound that made her freeze. A whimper. It was small and frightened, and it came from somewhere in the darkness ahead where the crawlspace branched into 2 directions. Lyra pulled out her flashlight and aimed it toward the sound, expecting to find a lost pet or something similar. Perhaps a maintenance bot that had gotten stuck. But what she found instead made her breath catch in her throat. Golden eyes stared back at her from the shadows. A Zachary pup crouched against the wall with his black fur matted and dirty, and his small body pressed into the corner as if he was trying to disappear into the metal itself. He was tiny by Zachary standards, barely 4 feet tall, with ears that seemed too big for his head, and paws that had not yet grown into the massive claws of an adult. And when he saw Lyra, he pulled his lips back and showed his teeth in a snarl that would have been terrifying if it did not look so desperate. "Stay back," he growled in common, his voice high and young, but sharp with fear. "I will bite you if you come closer." Lyra did not move. She studied the pup in the beam of her flashlight and noticed several things at once. The expensive fabric of his torn clothing that marked him as someone important. Device on his wrist that looked far too advanced for a common child. And most importantly, the way his right hind leg bent at an odd angle that spoke of a bone that had never formed correctly. She knew who this was. Every newsfeed for the past week had shown images of the Packfather's family, and this small face had appeared in the background of several broadcasts, always positioned behind the other children, always partly hidden, as if the camera operators had been instructed to keep him out of frame. Kethrin, the youngest son of Vorteth, the one the Zachary called the limping shame, because he had been born with a twisted leg that no surgery could fix, a defect that marked him as weak in a culture that worshipped strength above all else. "I know who you are," Lyra said softly, keeping her voice calm and steady, like she was talking to a frightened animal. "You are Kethrin of the High Pack." The pup flinched at the sound of his own name, and his snarl grew fiercer, even as his eyes grew wider with terror. "You will tell them where I am," he accused. "You will call the guards, and they will take me back." "Back to your family?" The word family made something flicker across the pup's face, something that looked like pain and anger and grief, all twisted together. "They are not my family," he said. "Family does not leave you behind when danger comes." Lyra felt something cold settle in her stomach as she began to understand what had happened. "They left you," she said. Not a question, but a statement. "When the bomb exploded, everyone ran," Kethrin said, and his voice cracked slightly, as if the memory was still too fresh to speak about without pain. "My father grabbed my brothers, and my mother grabbed my sisters, and they all ran to the safe room." He paused and looked down at his twisted leg. "I cannot run fast," he continued. "I tried to keep up, but they did not wait for me. Even look back. And when I finally reached the safe room, the door was already sealed, and no one came to open it." Lyra closed her eyes for a moment as the full weight of what she was hearing pressed down on her heart. A child abandoned by his own parents because he could not run fast enough. Left behind in a crisis because his leg made him a liability. Forgotten like broken equipment that was not worth the trouble of saving. "How long have you been down here?" she asked. 3 days, I think. Maybe 4. I found food in a storage room, but it is gone now, and I am very hungry." 3 days alone in the dark. 3 days while his family negotiated politics and plotted revenge, and never once mentioned that their youngest son was missing. Lyra reached into her pocket and pulled out a ration bar that she had been saving for her lunch break. A simple block of protein and nutrients that tasted like cardboard, but would keep a body alive. It out toward the pup. Here, she said, take this. Catherine stared at the food with hunger burning in his golden eyes, but he did not move to take it. Why, he asked, why would you help me when you could turn me in for a reward? Why would you feed a Zakari when my people mock you every day? Lyra looked at him and thought about all the times she had been laughed at and called Broken Claw and told that she should have been left to die. She thought about the fire and the screaming and the 19 trips through hell that had cost her everything except her life. Because I know what it feels like to be left behind, she said simply. Catherine studied her face for a long moment, and then his eyes dropped to her hands, to the twisted scars that marked her as damaged in the eyes of his people. You are broken too, he said, and there was no mockery in his voice, only wonder as if he was seeing something he had never expected to find. Lyra said, I am broken too. But you are still alive. Yes. How? It was such a simple question, but it held the weight of everything this child was struggling to understand. How to survive in a world that had decided he was worthless. How to keep going when everyone who should have loved him had thrown him away. You learn to carry yourself, Lyra said, when no one else will carry you. Catherine reached out slowly and took the ration bar from her scarred hand. His claws brushed against her damaged skin, and he did not flinch away, like so many others did. Will you help me? He asked quietly. Lyra knew she should say no. Helping him meant risking everything, her job, her freedom, and probably her life. Because harboring a member of the royal family without permission was a crime under Zakari law, and the punishment was death. But she looked at this small broken pup, with his matted fur, and his twisted leg, and his eyes full of hope, of desperate hope. And she saw herself 3 years ago, crawling out of a burning ship with ruined hands and a shattered future. Yes, she said, I will help you. She did not know what that help would cost her, but she knew she could not walk away. Lyra's quarters were small and plain, a single room with a narrow bed and a tiny bathroom and barely enough space to turn around. But to Catherine, it became a sanctuary. She smuggled him through the maintenance tunnels in the middle of the night shift, when the corridors were empty, and the security patrols were focused on the main areas of the station. And when she finally closed the door behind them and sealed the lock, she let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. You will be safe here, she told him. No one visits me, and no one checks on me because I am invisible to everyone who matters. Catherine limped in a slow circle around the room, sniffing the air, the way all Zakari did when they entered a new space, his golden eyes taking in every detail of her simple life. It is very small, he said. Yes, and it smells like you. Is that bad? The pup considered the question seriously before shaking his head. Smells safe, like a den where nothing bad can find me. Something warm flickered in Lyra's chest at those words. Over the next several days they fell into a routine. Lyra went to work during her normal shifts because any change in her behavior might attract attention. And while she was gone, Catherine stayed hidden in her quarters with strict instructions to stay quiet and not answer the door for anyone. She brought him food from the cafeteria, smuggling extra portions in her pockets and her bag, and every evening they sat together on her narrow bed and shared meals while the station hummed and vibrated around them. The pup was hungry for more than just food. He was hungry for answers. Why do humans help each other? He asked one night while chewing on a piece of synthetic meat that Lyra had saved for him. What do you mean? Among my people, the weak are left behind because they slow down the pack. But I have watched humans on this station, and they do not do this. I have seen humans carrying other humans who cannot walk, and feeding other humans who cannot feed themselves. Why? Lyra thought about the question carefully before answering. Because we believe that anyone can become weak, she said. Today I am strong, and you are weak. But tomorrow I might be the one who needs help. So we help each other, because we know that someday we will need help too. Kethrin frowned as if this idea was difficult to fit inside his head. But what about the ones who will never be strong? What about the ones who are born broken like me? They are still part of the pack, Lyra said. And a pack that throws away its weakest members is a pack that has forgotten what pack means. My father would say that is foolish. Maybe, but my people have survived a very long time by being foolish in this way. The pup fell silent, and Lyra could see thoughts moving behind his golden eyes, like fish swimming beneath the surface of deep water. She taught him things to pass the time, human games that required thinking instead of running, and Kethrin absorbed them like a sponge absorbing water. Chess fascinated him most of all. This piece is weak, he said, pointing at a pawn during their third game. It can only move forward, and it can only kill sideways, and it cannot retreat. Yes, but if it reaches the other side of the board, it can become the most powerful piece. Yes. That is strange, he said. Among my people, weak things do not become powerful, they simply die. Among my people, Lyra replied, weak things become powerful all the time. We have machines that make the weak strong, medicines that make the sick healthy, tools that let small hands do the work of large hands. She held up her scarred hands. These hands are weak now. They shake when I try to hold delicate things, and they hurt when the weather changes, but I can still use them to fix machines, and open doors, and feed a hungry pup. Kethrin stared at her hands for a long moment. How did you burn them? He asked, and it was the first time he had asked directly about her scars. Lyra told him the truth. She told him about the Icarus, and the fire, and the 19 trips through hell, about the choice she had made to run toward the screaming instead of away from it, about the way her hands had blistered and blackened as she dragged her crewmates to safety, one by one. When she finished, the pup was silent for so long that she thought he might have fallen asleep. You went into the fire, he finally said, his voice strange and quiet. Yes. 19 times, yes. Even though it was hurting you, yes. Why? It was the same question he had asked before, but now it carried different weight. Now it was not just curiosity, but something deeper, something that sounded almost like desperate. Because they were my pack, Lyra said simply, and you do not leave your pack behind. Kethrin made a sound that was half growl and half whimper, a noise that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside his chest. My pack left me behind, he said. My father and my mother and my brothers and my sisters, they left me, and they did not look back. Does that mean I am not part of their pack anymore? Lyra reached out and placed one scarred hand on top of his small furry paw. It means they forgot what pack means, she said. But you do not have to forget. You can remember, and you can be better than they are. How can I be better when I cannot even run? He asked. Running is not the only kind of strength, she said. There is also strength in thinking, and strength in planning, and strength in never giving up, even when everyone tells you that you should. She tapped the side of his head gently. Claws are not the only weapon. This is a weapon too. Very sharp. Something changed in the pup's eyes at those words. A small flame that had been flickering suddenly caught and began to burn brighter. I am not stupid, he said, and there was a new edge in his voice that had not been there before. My family thinks I am worthless because I am slow, but I learn faster than my brothers, and I remember more than my sisters, and I see things that they miss because they are too busy running to look. Then use that, Lyra said. Make it your strength. But what about my leg? It will never be fixed. Stop trying to fix it. Your leg is not a weakness. It is just a different way of moving. Find the things it lets you do instead of focusing on the things it does not. Kethrin looked down at his twisted leg, as if seeing it for the first time. Among the apex, he said slowly, those who cannot hunt are cast out. Then change what hunting means, Lyra said. Among humans, we have hunters who use their minds. eyes, and hunters who use their minds, and hunters who never leave their chairs. The prey does not care how you caught it, only that you did. The pup was quiet again, but this time the silence felt different, fuller somehow, like a pot being filled with water, drop by drop. Vethkai, he said suddenly. What? It is a word in my language. It means one who shapes hunters, the teachers who train young warriors to become what they are meant to be. He looked up at her with golden eyes that burned with something new. I think that is what you are, he said. I think you are my Vethkai. Lyra smiled, even though her eyes stung with tears she refused to let fall. Then learn well, she said, and make me proud. Neither of them knew that their time together was almost over. Neither of them knew that tomorrow the hunters would come. They came for her during the morning shift, when Lyra was halfway through repairing a water recycler in the lower maintenance section. 6 Zachary warriors surrounded her before she even knew they were there, their massive bodies blocking every exit, and their golden eyes burning with cold fury. Lyra Vance, the leader announced in a voice that rumbled like thunder. You are charged with crimes against the High Pack. You will come with us now. She did not try to run, because running from 6 Apex warriors was not running at all. It was just dying tired. They bound her wrists with metal restraints that bit into the scarred skin of her hands, and marched her through the corridors of the station, while every species they passed stopped to stare at the small human woman being dragged along by giant wolf-like predators. The journey ended at the diplomatic wing, where the Zachary delegation had set up their temporary headquarters, and the warriors pushed her through a massive door into a chamber that had been transformed into something resembling a throne room. Vorteth the Packfather sat on a raised platform at the far end of the room, his scarred body draped across a chair that looked more like a weapon than furniture. And around him stood the rest of the High Pack, his wives and children and advisors and guards. Dozens of Zachary, all staring at Lyra, with expressions that ranged from contempt to murderous rage. But Lyra barely noticed any of them, because her eyes found Kethryn immediately. The pup stood near the back of the gathering, with a guard on either side of him, his small body trembling, but his golden eyes locked onto hers with desperate intensity. They had found him. She did not know how, but they had found him, and now they both would pay the price. Bring her forward, Vorteth commanded, and the warriors shoved Lyra until she stood at the base of the platform, looking up at the most powerful Zachary in the Empire. The Packfather was enormous, even by the standards of his species. His black fur streaked with silver, and crisscrossed with scars that told the story of a lifetime of violence. And when he looked at Lyra, there was nothing in his golden eyes but cold evaluation. Lyra Vance, he said, maintenance worker, former scientist, the one my people call Broken Claw. Yes, she said, because there was nothing to gain from denial. You have committed crimes that carry the penalty of death under Zachary law. You kidnapped a member of the royal family. You held him prisoner for many days, and you filled his mind with dangerous ideas that threaten the foundations of our culture. I did not kidnap anyone. A growl rippled through the assembled Zachary at her audacity in contradicting the Packfather. You deny hiding my son in your quarters? Vorteth asked with a dangerous edge in his voice. I do not deny hiding him. I deny kidnapping him. There is a difference. Explain this difference before I remove your tongue. Lyra took a breath and steadied herself, because fear would not help her now, and submission would not save her. Kethryn was not taken, she said clearly, so that everyone in the room could hear. He was abandoned. I found him starving in a maintenance tunnel, where he had been hiding for 3 days, because when your family ran to safety, you left him behind. Silence fell over the room like a heavy blanket. Several of the High Pack shifted uncomfortably, and Lyra saw guilt flash across the faces of some of the younger Zachary before they could hide it. You dare accuse the High Pack of abandonment? Vorteth growled, rising from his throne like a mountain deciding to walk. I dare speak the truth, because I am going to die anyway, and I will not die with lies on my tongue." The Packfather descended from the platform and stalked toward her, with movements that reminded Lyra of a predator circling prey, slow and deliberate, and absolutely certain of its power. "Show me your hands," he commanded when he stood before her. Lyra held up her bound wrists and let him see the twisted scars that marked her as broken in his eyes. "These are the hands of a weak creature," Vorteth declared loudly for all to hear. "Damaged and useless, the hands of prey that should have died in whatever fire marked them." He leaned closer until his massive head was level with hers, and his breath washed over her face like hot wind. "What made you think these worthless hands had the right to touch my son?" Before Lyra could answer, a new voice cut through the tension. "Because those hands are worth more than every claw in this room." Kethran pushed past his guards and limped forward until he stood between Lyra and his father, his small body shaking, but his voice steady. Vorteth stared at his youngest son with an eye expression of disbelief. "You would defend this creature?" he asked. "This broken prey thing that filled your head with weakness?" "She did not fill my head with weakness," Kethran said. "She filled it with truth. Truth that you have been too proud to see." "What truth could a damaged human possibly teach an apex?" Kethran drew himself up as tall as his twisted leg would allow, and met his father's golden eyes without flinching. "You left me to die," he said. "When the bomb exploded, you grabbed my brothers, and my mother grabbed my sisters, and you all ran to the safe room, and none of you looked back to see if I was following." "You are slow," Vorteth said. "You could not keep up. So you left me, your own blood, your own son, you left me behind because I was inconvenient. That is the way of the apex. The pack does not slow down for the weak, and that is why the apex are fools." A shocked gasp rippled through the high pack. Pup's words. "This human found me," Kethran continued, his voice growing stronger with every word. "She found me starving and terrified and hiding in the dark like a wounded animal, and she did not leave me behind." He pointed at Lyra with one small paw. "She risked her life to help me. She shared her food when she barely had enough for herself. She taught me things that no Jacari has ever taught me, and do you know why? Because she is a fool who does not understand strength. No, because she understands strength better than any of you ever will." Kethran's voice rang through the throne room like a bell. "Her hands are burned because she carried 19 of her pack from a fire. 19 times she went back into the flames, even though it was destroying her. 19 people who lived because she refused to stop." He turned to face the assembled high pack. "How many of you would do that even once? How many of you would walk into fire for your packmates? How many of you would burn your own hands to save someone weaker than you?" No one answered. "That is what I thought," Kethran said with contempt dripping from every word. "You call yourselves the apex, but you are not. You are cowards who only prey on those who cannot fight back. You mock this human for her scars, but those scars prove that she is more apex than any of you will ever be." The pup turned back to his father and did something that made every Jacari in the room freeze. He tilted his head back and exposed his throat to Lyra. "She is my Vethkai," he declared, "and I am not ashamed to bare my throat to her because she has earned my trust in ways that my own blood never has." Vortex stood like a statue carved from black stone, staring at his smallest and weakest son, who had just called the entire high pack cowards and shown ultimate submission to a human. The moment stretched like a wire pulled too tight. Then, the pack father did something no one expected. He laughed. The laughter that erupted from Vorteth was not the mocking sound that Lyra had learned to expect from Jacari. It was something else entirely, something that held notes of surprise and disbelief, and perhaps even admiration. The high pack exchanged confused glances, because none of them understood what their pack father found amusing about this moment. My weakest son, Vorteth said, when his laughter finally faded. My limping shame, as the court calls him when they think I cannot hear, has just shown more courage than warriors 3 times his age. He looked at Kethrin with new eyes, as if seeing his youngest child for the first time. To call the High Pack cowards to their faces, to bare your throat to a human in front of everyone who matters, that takes a kind of strength that has nothing to do with claws or speed. Kethrin did not lower his exposed throat. I meant every word, he said, and I am not afraid of what happens next. No, Vorteth said. Vorteth agreed slowly. I can see that you are not, and that is perhaps the most interesting thing about this entire situation. The Packfather turned to look at Lyra, who still stood with her hands bound, waiting for the death sentence that had seemed inevitable just moments ago. 19 times into the fire, he said. Is this true? Yes. Show me these hands again. She raised her bound wrists, and he studied the scarred tissue with an expression that held none of the disgust she had seen before. Among my people we mark our greatest warriors with scars earned in battle, he said. We wear them as proof of our strength and our survival. But I have never seen scars like these. He reached out with one massive paw and touched her damaged hands with surprising gentleness. These are not battle scars. These are sacrifice scars. You did not receive them by fighting enemies. You received them by saving allies. Them by choice. Yes, Vorteth was silent for a long moment, and in that silence, Lyra could feel the entire room holding its breath. I have conquered 6 systems, the Packfather finally said. I have killed more enemies than I can count, and I have led the Ja'Kari Empire to heights of power that previous generations could not imagine. He looked down at his own hands, at the claws that had torn through so many throats. But I have never walked into fire for anyone. I have never burned myself to save a packmate. I have never even considered doing such a thing, because among the Apex, such behavior is considered weakness. He looked back at Lyra. And yet here stands my weakest son, telling me that I am wrong, telling me that true strength lies not in what we take, but in what we give, and I find myself unable to argue with him. Father, one of the older sons spoke up from the crowd. Surely you cannot be considering mercy for this human. Broke our laws. She must be punished. Must she? Vorteth asked without turning around. And what would punishing her accomplish? Would it make us stronger? Would it prove that the Apex are worthy of our name? Or would it simply prove that my son is right, that we are cowards who destroy what we do not understand? No answer came. Vorteth turned to face his gathered family, and his voice carried the weight of absolute authority. I left my son behind, he announced. When the explosion happened, I grabbed those closest to me, and I ran, and I did not look back to see if Kethrin was following. I told myself it was because the pack does not slow down for the weak. But the truth is simpler than that. He paused, and Lyra saw something flicker across his scarred face that might have been shame. The truth is that I forgot about him. In my fear and my haste, I forgot that my youngest son existed. And if this human had not found him, he would have died alone in the dark. The Packfather walked to where Kethrin stood, and for the first time in the pup's entire life, his father knelt down to his level. You are not my shame, Vorteth said quietly. You are perhaps the only one of my children who has found the courage to tell me when I am wrong. He reached out and touched Kethrin's twisted leg, the limb he had never acknowledged before. The defect he had tried to pretend did not exist. I have been cruel to you, he admitted. I have allowed others to be cruel to you, and I have told myself that it was for your own good, that you would never survive in our world, and it was kindness to not give you hope. It was not kindness, Kethrin said softly. No, it was not. It was cowardice, just as you said. The Packfather rose to his full height and turned to Lyra. You protected my son when I did not. You taught him things that I should have taught him. You showed him a kind of strength that I did not know existed. For this I owe you a debt that I do not know how to repay. He made a gesture, and one of the guards came forward to remove the restraints from her wrists. "You are free," Vorteth declared, "and more than free. From this day forward you are Veth-Kai in the eyes of the High Pack. You are one who shapes hunters, and any Ja'Kari who treats you with disrespect will answer to me." A murmur of shock rippled through the assembled crowd, because no human had ever been granted such a title before. Lyra rubbed her wrists where the restraints had dug into her scarred skin. "And Catherine," she asked, "what happens to him?" Vorteth looked at his youngest son with an expression that was difficult to read. "He will return with us to the homeworld, not as a shame, but as an experiment. He will be trained in the ways he has learned from you, in strategy and patience, and the kind of strength that does not require fast legs." He placed a massive paw on her, Catherine's shoulder, "and perhaps he will teach us things that we have forgotten. Things about what it truly means to be a pack." In the days that followed, the station returned to normal, but Lyra's life did not. She still walked the corridors, and she still fixed the machines. But now, when Zakari passed her, they did not laugh. Instead, they touched their chests in a gesture of acknowledgement that she learned meant respect. The word had spread through the station and beyond. The story of the burned human who had protected an apex prince and changed the mind of a warlord. And Lyra found herself transformed from invisible to impossible to ignore. Catherine came to say goodbye on the day his family's ship was finally repaired. He stood in her tiny quarters, looking at the narrow bed where he had slept, and the small space where she had taught him to play chess and see the world differently. "I will not forget," he promised, his golden eyes bright. "Emotions that Ja'Kari were not supposed to show. I will remember everything you taught me, and I will make you proud." Lyra knelt down so she could look him in the eyes. "You already make me proud," she said. "You stood up to the most powerful Ja'Kari in the galaxy, and you did not flinch. There is nothing you could do that would make me prouder than I already am." Catherine threw his small arms around her and hugged her tightly, burying his face in her shoulder the way human children did with their parents. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for finding me. Thank you for not leaving me behind." "I will never leave you behind," she said. "No matter how far apart we are, you will always be part of my pack." They held each other for a long moment, and then the pup pulled away and straightened his spine and became once again the prince he had been born to be. "Goodbye, Veth-Kai," he said formally, but his eyes were soft. "Goodbye, Catherine." He limped out of her quarters and out of her daily life, but not out of her heart. Over the years that followed, he sent her messages when he could, short formal notes that sounded very Ja'Kari on the surface, but always ended the same way. "I remember what you taught me, Veth-Kai, that scars mean we fought something and lived, that strength is reaching into the fire. And once, just once, I hope I make your hands proud." Lyra sat alone in her quarters on the day she received that message, and she traced the warped, scarred skin of her palms with gentle fingers. She thought about fire and sacrifice, and a small broken pup who had grown into something neither his people nor hers had expected. She thought about strength and weakness, and how the line between them was so much thinner than anyone wanted to believe. And she smiled, because her hands were proud. Her hands had always been proud, and now the galaxy was finally beginning to understand why.